Okay, let's talk about the new Thundering Affix that we see on beta. So basically, it got reworked, and now you have Mark of Wind or Mark of Lightning. I made a video about this a couple days ago. If you want my like first impressions on it, you can go listen to that. Basically, you do 15% bonus damage and healing, and then whenever you come into contact with the player with the opposite buff, it removes the buff. If you don't get the buff removed after 15 seconds, then you'll be stunned for 8 seconds and take damage every second for the duration. This affix now is on the beta, and let's talk about it and kind of look at what it actually ends up looking like. So one of the big things that they kept from previous implementation of Thundering was the ground swirlies. So like the storm rolls in, everything gets kind of dark, and the debuffs go out after the storm concludes. And so that part, the storm part with the swirlies kind of persists, but now there's this other part where 4 players get marked with the buff, and it seems like it's 50-50 between the tank and the healer as to who's going to be getting it. In addition to that, it seems like it's on a global timer, but you have to be in combat for it to have a chance to proc. And after a certain point, after a certain time period, you actually see that I have a Thundering Weak Aura. It has a chance to proc. And so there basically is what the initial starting of it looks like, where the swirlers are coming out of the sky. These blue ones are part of Thundering. Let me slow this down a little bit so it's not 1.5x. So the swirlers are coming down out of the sky. And then after they're done, then everybody gets marked with the buff. And you see I have the lightning one, this person in front of me has the wind, and then there's like somebody with the wind and somebody has, and then our healer has the lightning right here. And you can see them notated by the buff frame. So overall, I don't think it's a very complicated affix. I think it's fairly simple. At the same point, just from playing with it for a few hours, I think that it's not that interesting. And so why I think it's not that... Okay, so first off, I guess I'll talk about why I think it's not that interesting, then I'll talk about problems that it potentially has. You don't feel like you gain a lot whenever you're playing around it and intentionally trying to game it for that 15% damage buff. I know that 15% damage isn't like an insignificant amount or a trivial amount, but I do know that trying to play around it for that 15% damage buff is not exactly the most critical thing, and you don't really notice a difference whenever you're playing around it. Maybe it would be interesting if it got changed to haste, or maybe something else to where you noticed like the amount of damage or stats that you ended up gaining to where it impacted your kit. But I don't think that 15% damage is like anything to really scoff at. It just isn't like super noticeable as an affix. In addition to that, I think that it's just not something that's like super memorable. Personally, do I think that this is fine? I think it's a fine affix. I think it's like very middle of the road. No like major overwhelming complaints with it. I just don't think it's like the most engaging thing. So giving players 15 seconds to clear, it feels fine. Now let's talk about some of the downsides that I've noticed with it. I'm glad that this showed up immediately. So the biggest issue that I've ever seen is if you have a player die on a pack, particularly DPS, the DPS are prioritized to always get the buff, right? And so if a DPS dies on a pack and releases and has to run back, they're going to have that buff on them almost regardless of where they are, since it is like global combat. So you see our healer and our DPS warrior have that buff on them. And if you look at this, our healer notices almost immediately that this DPS warrior is mounted and running across this platform trying to get to him with the buff. Because if you don't clear them, it stuns you for 8 seconds, and the dot that it provides actually hits fairly hard. I don't think it's going to kill you outright without any healing, but it's close. And if you take any other ambient damage while the dot is on you, you're going to die. So you do definitely get punished if you don't clear. So look at that. Our healer and our warrior gets it like almost across the map and is barely able to clear with the healer. I think that is like a fundamental issue with the affix, and I don't know how that gets fixed. But there should definitely be something where if a player dies in the middle of a pull and they have the buff, the other player shouldn't just be forced to either get stunned. Okay, so if the player dies, you can actually run over their corpse and clear. If a player gets it and they're like 85 yards away, I think that there has to be something that should be looking to change just with it. I think that that's the biggest issue that I have with Thundering right now. That's one of the biggest complaints, is like what happens whenever people die. In addition to that, I find it, and it may be because I'm like new and I'm not tracking it very well, but I find it kind of difficult, especially whenever mobs are around, to kind of tell if you clear with players or not in a lot of situations. Because there are a lot of times where I'll run over a player and I'll think that I cleared, and I didn't actually clear with them, or they cleared with somebody else in a couple of seconds before I cleared with them. And for me, maybe it's because I'm just bad and I'm not like being super diligent about it, but I think that it's like kind of difficult for me to always tell when I have the buff on me versus when I've cleared with somebody else. So like here, it's very clear that I cleared because we're all kind of standing out. There's nothing happening, nothing going on. But particularly whenever I have to run into melee or there's like a mob with a large hitbox, there's a lot of mobs that are running around, it's kind of difficult for me to, one, identify exactly where the player is that has the debuff, and two, being able to get it cleared off. I think that those are the two biggest things where I'm like, I feel like there's something that should maybe change with just with the telegraphing of this. Overall, though, how would I rank this? I think it's a fine affix. There are a lot of seasonal affixes that I've seen in the past where I'm like, oh, this is very unfun to play. This isn't something that I enjoy dealing with. I think overall this is an okay affix. I would describe it as mid, and I think that that's like, it's middle of the road. There's not a lot positive going on with it, but at the same point, there are things that punish you, like particularly getting stunned and whatnot, but I never felt like it was obnoxious to play. And I was like, oh, this is unfun in any meaningful capacity. I thought that this was just like an all right affix. There's going to be times that you're going to play around it, and times that you're going to gimmick it, like you're going to have the thundering queued up, you're going to wait for it to be queued up, and then you're going to pull a boss because that's going to line up super well with a damage amp or something like that on a boss. So there's going to be times where you play around it, especially whenever players get more experienced with it. That's going to come with time. And so at that point, I think it'll be kind of cool in some ways, but it's not going to always be like that. Overall, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the Thundering Seasonal Affix. If you tested it, what have you guys thought? Do you think that I'm about right where it's like, it's an okay affix? I don't think that it's like bad. There are sometimes where there are seasonal affixes that I'm like, this is too punishing in one way or the other. It's really annoying to play. That ends up happening a lot with affixes in general. I don't think that this has hit that mark. And so I'm interested to hear what you guys have said for those who have tested it. In the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Adios.